Hey, it's Jessica DaMassa, and welcome to WTF Health. I'm here at AHIP's Consumer Experience and Digital Health Forum, and joining me right now, I have Rohit Bhargava, who's got the coolest title. He is the Chief Trend Curator for the Non-Obvious Company. He's also an author who's written 8 different books. The 9th one is coming out soon, and it is about non-obvious trends. So Rohit, happy to have you here. Good to talk to you.
Thank you. We had a great time today, and it was a pleasure to be on stage with you.
Oh, thank you so much. So, so you are somebody who is obviously curating trends, and you're doing this outside of healthcare, thank God. And so you're kind of pulling together big macro, ideas about like what is kind of driving behavior in the future. So tell us what you've found out.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I spend most of my time looking at multiple industries. And one of the big things that I really try and teach people, and I talked about in my session, was how do you get outside of your industry? Because I think a lot of us don't intentionally do that. Yeah. We try and get as deep as we can, we try and read as much as we can, but we don't look at totally unrelated industries. And sometimes like that's what you need in order to be more innovative. And so when I try and describe the world through trends, most of it is how do you take an idea from over here, pull it with an idea from over here, and like put those pieces together. Like that's what I think real trend curation, which is how I describe it, not trend spotting, but trend curation, that's what I think it comes from.
Okay, and I love one of the things that you said earlier. This was like my favorite line. You talked about you actually asked the question, what if we collected ideas the way that we collect frequent flyer miles for an airline? And it's like, because if you have a few ideas, you really can't go anywhere. Just like if you have a few frequent flyer miles, right, you really can't go. So tell me a little bit more about this thinking on this, and like, can we really do that?
Yeah, I mean, I spend a lot of time not just collecting ideas, but like saving them in a way that's useful so that I can come back to them.
Okay, meaning what?
Meaning like a lot of times what I'll see people do at events, right, is they'll see something interesting or they'll find a quote that they love and they'll write it on a scrap of paper. And I watch that and I know that that scrap of paper is going to either vanish, totally, or if it doesn't vanish, it'll show up on their desk 2 weeks later and they'll read it and say, why did I write this down in the first place? Yeah. What was I thinking, right?
So what's your advice?
So first of all, have a central place to put all of your ideas, right? Okay. Like that's super important.
All right, what do you use, just out of curiosity?
I use, let me see if I do. Here's a prop for you.
Here we go.
So this is my notebook.
The non-obvious notebook.
It's well branded because I'm a branding guy. And it's what I use to always write down my notes in.
Oh my God, I legit did not see that coming.
There you go. Yeah, we did not plan this at all. No, not at all.
Oh my God.
But what I do is when I write down a note in there, so for example, if you told me about an amazing book that you had just read, I would not just write the name of the book, I would write the word book and I would put a box around it.
Okay.
So what that means is when I go back through my notebook, I'm looking at every time that I wrote the word book with a box around it, and I know every book that I wrote down that I should read. Okay. And I can buy them all at once or review them all at once. So I'm making my notes useful by tagging them, right? Okay. Almost like you use hashtags in social media, yeah, but I'm doing it physically in my notebook.
All right.
So that's the way that I do it. Mm-hmm. But the whole point is like find some sort of reference so that your notes become useful instead of useless.
How do you do that with pictures?
So I use Sharpies and I write down things on picture. Yeah, so I rip stuff out of magazines a lot. I write down like keywords or like why did I find something interesting? Just like memory joggers, right? Cool. Because what you don't want to do, like a lot of times in school, like have you ever had that moment where like you were highlighting stuff and then you realize that you highlighted the whole
everything?
Page, and you're like, this is not useful, right? Yeah. So like we have to pick what we highlight, right? Mm-hmm. We have to pick what we pay attention to. And so one of my favorite ways to do this, and a lot of us work with highly technical people, right? So it's hard to get them to simplify because they're like, oh, you missed this piece, or like, oh, there's a nuance here, and like we don't want to oversimplify, like because we're so in our heads about it. So one of the best ways to do it is you take these really small Post-it notes and you give people a Sharpie, and you say, write down what's most important. Because with a Sharpie on a Post-it note, you can only fit maybe 5 or 6 words.
That's why Twitter is so great.
Yeah, it used to be, right? Before they expanded the, the word limit, right? But like it forced you to say stuff. Now, people can still say stupid stuff on Twitter, right? Yeah. But the point is we're condensing it, right? And that's kind of the idea of this. Like this whole trend curation is how do we condense this noise into stuff that's actually useful and then do it over a period of time where the patterns start to emerge. Because you can't just do it for one day and be like, okay, here's the trend for 2019, right? It doesn't work. No. You have to actually look at it over a span of time.
Do you have a recommended span of time?
So I do it annually just because the trends come annually. Sure. But I think that works for a lot of people because like we have to put our project plans together annually. Sure. We're looking at our annual like goals. That we're going to reach in our roles, in our jobs. So annual works for a lot of people. Maybe it's quarterly. Maybe it's like every week you have to do like a newsletter, right? Yeah. So like every week I find for my newsletter and my email newsletter, every week I find 5 interesting stories and I share them. So I'm doing this on a weekly basis also. but then doing it over the annual basis too.
All right. So I know you've got trend predictions, right? Or like you've got like what kind of like what's rising to the surface. And like we said, this is like not just in healthcare, but I do want to zoom in on healthcare because that's kind of who's watching us.
Yes.
So of the trends that you have that you're predicting for the coming year, you know, can you give us a sneak preview? What do you think is going to happen that would apply to healthcare?
We're at a perfect time because it's like right, you know, it's sort of everything's shifting, right?
Yeah.
So one of the trends that I've been talking about for several years now is something I call virtual empathy.
Virtual empathy. Okay.
And virtual empathy was all about using technology to allow us to understand people unlike ourselves. So we can put on a VR headset and we can see what it's like to be a refugee. We can go into like a pollution pod and see what it's like, we can breathe the air of a really polluted city to experience what that's like. And what's shifting in the coming year is that has translated into what we're now calling enterprise empathy.
Okay.
And enterprise empathy is there's a business model behind this stuff.
Okay, so it's not enough to just feel what somebody else is feeling, but I'm just like, I'm going to feel what somebody else is feeling. I'm going to sell this to someone else.
People are turning it into businesses, which is really interesting because now you've got like all of these different, like Care Coach, for example, like they're turning these virtual avatars that are powered by people behind them into really interesting platforms to help us care for the older population, which is one of the biggest challenges worldwide, right? To care for people who are aging. And so you see all of this smart innovation and it's being driven by how do we add more empathy into it? I mean, look at robotics, right? Like look at Pepper the robot or Jibo or any of these robots that are injected with personality. And sometimes people look at that and they're like, oh my God, do I really want like a robot reading bedtime stories to my kid? But the way I think about it is like, well, you want that more than you want the alternative, which is robots that don't appreciate humans at all. Because once we turn our lives over to them, like you want these robots, trust me, you want these robots to have empathy. Yeah, you want them to appreciate human life because otherwise they'll just calculate it and be like, you know what, the earth would be better if we just killed all the humans, right? Like, so, and we do not want robots to conclude that.
This is a great trend for saving our lives and all of humanity.
Yes,
fantastic. Yeah, good.
Give robots empathy. Please give robots
No, and I think we're seeing that. I mean, I definitely feel like you're saying that to me, and I'm like, yeah, I can see that happening here in healthcare, particularly with a lot of the health startups that are coming up and leveraging some of the newer exponential technologies to like do that.
Well, and it's, you know, the other thing is like a lot of times we look at it and we're like, okay, there's a human thing and there's a technology thing.
Yeah.
And there's not as much of the like relationship between the two yet. But more and more, I think people are starting to figure out, like, look, there's situations where technology and automation is optimal, right? Like there's no situation in life where I would want to go and stand in line to pull money out of a bank. I prefer to do that on an ATM. That's a way better automated experience. That's not something I want a human for. But there's other situations which are much more human where I might want that human interaction. So companies that are starting to get better at figuring out which one's which, especially in healthcare.
What else do you see? I mean, this coming year that you think that we all need to be kind of abreast of in terms of a behavioral trend?
So one of the things I'm seeing all over the place, and this is like corporations as well as governments, is a trend that we called innovation envy.
Innovation envy.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay, tell me about this one.
It is, I mean, the nice thing about some of these trends is they are exactly what they sound like.
Yeah.
And so this one is the idea that we always see someone over our shoulder who's doing something innovative and thinking, oh, you know what? We need beanbag chairs. We need like, you know, an innovation lab.
If we only had the foosball table.
Right. We need like that thing. We need that Silicon Valley thing, right?
Yeah.
And so we overcompensate too far.
Okay.
And I think you saw this like perfectly dramatically in this whole search, this beauty contest that Amazon ran for all of these cities to find their new headquarters. And all these cities are like, oh, we could be more innovative and we'll build an innovation lab. And mayors are like, we'll change our name to Mr. Amazon and like, you know, all this ridiculous stuff, right? And they ended up choosing two of the most predictable cities that they probably could have chosen without this whole manhunt thing anyway, right? And I think what that showed us was just how desperate people are to be innovative, or at least to be perceived as innovative.
Do you think that we're all inherently innovative?
Is it a trick question?
No, I'm just asking you. That's my job.
You know, I'm not the guy that gives everyone a trophy for participation. I think that we have the capacity to be innovative, but I think a lot of people just shut that part of their brain off. They're like, you know what? Like, I'm good at something. I'm already good at it. I know that what you're doing is right. And in some cases, like rightly so, they're like, look, they don't want to overcompensate for innovation, right? Because it's kind of like that new Coke moment in our back of our heads, which is like, you know what, like we have a product, people like it, and now all of a sudden, like the whole new Coke thing came about because Pepsi ran a bunch of ads that said, oh, people like the taste of Pepsi better, and everyone at Coke panicked.
Right.
And they changed Coke, and then everyone said, oh, wait, you changed Coke, what the heck?
Coke,
right? You can't change Coke, and they changed it back. And like, so there is this overcompensation.
In healthcare, I don't think we need to worry about that. We generally have a terrible experience.
There is a lot of that looking over the shoulder, right?
Definitely. And especially now, because there are these consumer tech companies that are starting to get into this space. And I think a lot of the healthcare establishment, as I like to call them, are freaking out. And they are starting to just like plug things in and amass things. I feel like we've seen a lot of big healthcare companies just all of a sudden have an accelerator program, like to grow their own startups. And it's like,
or a hackathon.
Yeah, or a hackathon. Like, let's just throw a hackathon at this. Like, yeah, totally.
Yeah, or so many of them. I mean, what you hear all over the place is replace we do whatever with we're a technology company, right? Because like everybody's a technology company.
Oh, everybody's a platform for something.
Yeah, and technology is like an enablement thing, but you don't see automotive companies running around saying, you know, we're a tire company.
Right.
Because like the tires make the car go, but like you're not buying tires, you're buying a car, right? Or you're ride sharing, but either way, like the tires are necessary, but nobody's focused on the tires, right? And yet so much of the time that we talk about technology, like that's the tires in so many situations. And we're so focused on that and we shouldn't be.
How do you think in healthcare, what's the right way to do trending and innovation? Because I mean, a lot of these companies, I mean, like I'm kind of in a unique spot myself because it's like I talk to a lot of the startups, I talk to a lot of the companies that really are innovating in this space, and they're trying desperately to work with like the healthcare establishment, which are these mega companies, these huge health plans or these huge hospital systems that can't turn on a dime and be agile. How do those two worlds like work together to take advantage of some of these like more like the trends that are setting the market direction that we need to be, you know, quote unquote, out in front of? Or do we even not need to be out in front of them?
Well, I think that one of the biggest things is a lot of healthcare organizations in particular, but also many large organizations have become lawyer-led.
Okay.
And what that means is that they let the lawyers figure out what the innovation should be and shut down programs before they even start. Instead of flipping around the script and saying, here's what we really want to do because this is what our patients and our customers are asking us for, how do we do it in a way that is going to protect us?
Right.
Because what's the job of a lawyer? The job of a lawyer is to reduce risk.
Right.
And what's the least risky thing? To do nothing.
Of course.
So it's logical that lawyers would say, don't
do anything. Leave
right.
it alone.
That makes sense, right? That's totally logical.
Absolutely.
But that's not how you should drive your business strategy.
Right.
Because you can't drive it based on doing nothing. We know that doesn't work. So the challenge now is how do we actually get visionary leaders and people who are challenging the progress enough to say, this is what everyone wants us to do and this is what we think we should do. Now, how do we track back from that and actually deliver something closer to that? And it forces them to have a different legal mindset or a mindset with how to engage the lawyers. Because it's not that you don't need the lawyers and it's not that they don't provide a valuable service, but you can't lead your strategy based on that.
Right. Absolutely. So I was going to say, so how do we then, like, is there like last bit of advice from you? How do we use the trends, like the trends that you publish annually in your book, or trends even that we see like elsewhere? How do we use those in a smart way to move us forward?
Yeah. So there's a temptation whenever I publish a trend that people say, oh, well, we need to tailor our business to that.
Yeah.
And actually trends, I believe, are much more like sparks than they are fires.
Okay.
And a spark allows you to think about the world a little bit differently and to change maybe a little bit of what you're doing. So for example, one of the trends that we wrote about some time ago was called deliberate downgrading. Okay. And it was all about this idea that sometimes we want the less technical, more functional version. And so the perfect example of that is like I have the Samsung Galaxy, right? And you know, if I'm down to 4% battery life at 7 p.m. and I'm about to go out, right? I know that my battery's going to die, but the Samsung has something called low battery power mode. And in low battery power mode, the screen goes to black and white. I can't use most of my apps, but my calling and my text messaging work. Okay. And so in that situation, the perfect innovation for me is that my phone can last for another 6 hours on 4% battery life with this downgraded mode. That's what I want, right? So part of it is figuring out like what is that mode that someone wants and how do you innovate for that to deliver that in that moment. Okay. And that's a perfect example of a company creating that mode, which ordinarily, I mean, I have this beautiful smartphone in my pocket that can do so much stuff, right? Why would I possibly want to turn it black and white and turn off 80% of the apps?
Well, fulfill your need of
to fill that need. Right.
Yeah,
Right.
and I think, I feel like that's a tendency with technology. A lot of times is people think more is better, but it's like sometimes it's like, oh my God, I just want
this
to
work. Yeah,
totally.
exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very cool. Rohit, awesome to talk to you. The book is coming out soon, this next year's Non-Obvious Trends, so take a look for it. You can buy that on Amazon. I know I saw it myself.
Non-Obvious 2019. That's it.
Non-Obvious 2019 coming soon. Again, a pleasure. Thank you so much for helping us figure out how to do better in the future. I'm Jessica DaMassa with WTF Health here at AHIP's Consumer Experience and Digital Health Forum. Thanks for joining us.